So we spent a lot of time on theory and getting prepared for this step. We're now at the stage where we can do some coding. What we're going to do is use SQLite from the command line. So we're not going to get into programming yet. We're going to go through and really understand some of those basic commands we talked about in a real sort of live scenario. So let's get into that right now. So I'm in Android Studio. Now we're not going to be creating a project yet. That's going to be in the next video. What we're going to do here is we're just going to be using the command line. Now I've already got my emulator going, as you can see here, Genie Motion. So we're going to click on the terminal now, which we've talked about before. And we're going to maximize this and give it a bit more space so that we can actually see what we're doing a bit more here. So let's expand that out a little bit. So first things first, I'm going to type ADB shell. And what you can see on the screen there is telling us that this is we're actually now logged into the console, or I should say the emulator. So at this point we can type ls. We can look at the file system we talked about before, and you can see there's lots of bits of information there. And if you recall, we had a directory called data. So we can go cd/data/data, and you can see there's lots of things there. Ones of particular interest are the org.example ones. You can see these are applications that I've created on this emulator, this Android virtual device, as you can see. So if you recall, we had a file structure that we could go navigate down to. We talked about that in the previous videos. So for example, we can go down to org.example.top10 downloader. And you can see there's our file structure. We haven't got any databases yet. Now if we're running Java code, we could do this automatically, but because we're using the command line here, we're not doing any Java code. We're going to do it manually. We're going to make a directory, mkdir databases. CD databases, and go into that folder. If I type pwd, you can see now that the path there, data/data, and then we've got the package name and then /databases. So let's get into SQLite and have a look at that. Oops, SQLite 3 is what it's called, so I'm going to type that in. So you can see on the screen that we've now got SQLite 3 here. So that's telling us we're logged into the interface. So from here we can start using those SQL commands that we talked about before. So first things first, type .headers on. I'll show you why shortly. Now why don't we create a table? At the moment we haven't got any tables because we haven't created any. And if we recall back to the previous videos, create table, let's type those commands in: contacts, name, text, phone, integer, email, text, semicolon. And we can see that we've now got that. So why don't we insert a record now? Insert into contacts. Remember the syntax before was name, the field names we want to insert, phone, email, values. Use single or double quotes. Often I use single quotes, but especially when you're actually using Java, it makes more sense. But either will work. Tim, 6545678, and an email address. Just make up one. tim@email.com. Single quote, the bracket, and a semicolon. And again, with SQLite, if you get no errors, that means everything's worked successfully. So I can type select star from contacts. And you can see now we've got our records. Now, when I type the command up above headers on, that's what showed these things. So that's showing us for each field, and that's the value of it. You can see the name field has got the value of Tim, phone, the number, email, and the email address. So we can insert another record I should say, insert into contacts. And here's an alternate way of doing it. We can just type values. Brian, 1234, whoops, no double quotes because of course it's a number. Brian at my email. And of course I use double quotes this time instead of single quotes. And we've got an error there. And the reason we've got an error is because I've added too many single quotes. Okay, I've got an error there now. So I'm going to type that in again, this time without the making the typo. Insert into contacts, values, Brian, 1234. This time I won't add the extra quote by mistake, Brian at myemail.com. We'll do one more, insert into contacts, values, Roy, 3456. We'll type Roy at myemail.com. Okay, now if we type select star from contacts, you can see we've now got 3 records on the screen. So this is giving you sort of a bit of an overview of what SQL is like. So moving on, we talked about updating. Now if you recall, the update command was update, then whatever the name of the table is, that's contacts, set, the field name we want to set. So set name equals, let's say, Timothy. Now if I just pressed enter there without doing anything else, all the records would be replaced, because by default, unless you give it some sort of criteria, some sort of filter, it will actually update all records. And this is one of both the most powerful but the most dangerous features of SQLite. If you get the command syntax wrong, you'll update every record in the database. And believe me, I've done that before by mistake. I've updated tens of thousands of records when I meant to only update one. So how do we update one? Let's just say we only wanted to update that very first record where the name was Tim. So we can type where name equals Tim. Again, nothing went back, which means that it's worked. Type select star from contacts. And you can see it's now Timothy. The name has been changed to Timothy. So let's just say we want to delete something. Delete from table name. And again, if I just type that, that would delete all the records from the entire table, which we don't want to do. So we usually need to put a criteria. So where, let's just say name. Let's change a little bit so that where phone equals 3456. We just select star from contacts again. We've now got 2 records. You can see the row has been deleted. So we're talking to the database that's residing on the Genymotion Android virtual device. And this is how easy SQLite is to use from that command line. So you can probably see now why we needed to set up the command line in that previous video. In the next video, we're going to talk about it. We're going to be using Java and typing code into Java, and you'll find that's a lot easier because the Java will actually create the database automatically for us, and we don't have to get down and sort of use this command line. But it's very useful. It is a very useful skill to learn the command line because particularly for debugging purposes, it can be extremely useful to sort of navigate right in and have a look at the the database, and that's why I'm showing you this way. And just to show you that if something is typed wrong, so if you typed namer by mistake instead of namer from contacts, you will get notified you've made an error. You can see there, no such column, namer, so it does give you some sort of bit of a breakdown of what's going wrong. So a few other commands just before we finish. .help gives you a list of quite a few different commands that are available within SQLite 3. A couple of the handy ones are tables, or .table I should say. .tables gives you a list of tables. In this case there's only one. .schema, by default it will show everything. In this case there is only the one, otherwise you can specify, you could just literally type in .schema contacts. That's quite useful as well. .show gives you some details, the various parameters and the default options. And there's also one other one which you might find useful is the .dump. .dump up here dumps the database into a SQL text format. So that's a way for you to create the SQL statements necessary to recreate that entire database. Very useful if you want to run that, copy that from one machine to another. Incidentally, before I go, .exit to quit. And you can see we're now back at the prompt and we can type exit now. And we've closed down and we've actually closed out from the ADB shell. So in other words, we've disconnected from the emulator and we're back now onto the computer itself. So I can type exit again. And that's closed that down and we're back in Android Studio. So again, just confirming ADB shell, what that did was it connected effectively to the virtual machine. So if I then close this down, close that down, and if I go to the terminal again and type ADB shell, it's not going to work because we haven't got a device. So you can see it's trying to connect to a virtual device. And again, it'll quite happily connect to either a virtual device or a physical device if you've got one plugged in. Okay, so I hope that's given you a solid overview of what the ADB shell is used for, and how useful it is to get into SQLite and run that from the command line if you want to sort of check out your structures of your databases, or you want to delete some things. Saves you having to sort of recreate and write programs to set up your databases, which you may not always want to do, particularly when you're testing and setting up your app for the first time. So that's that side of things. In the next set of videos, we're going to go through and we're going to move on finally to Java. We're going to start creating our apps in Java to go through and set up and use our databases, create databases. We're going to go through and insert records and so forth. And then we're going to move on to more advanced things. We're going to start with the basics, just to really show you what the Java equivalent is. But then I want to go through and show you some much more advanced things, making the most out of databases, and even moving into some of the advanced features of Android. So we'll see you in those next videos.